It was a cloudy Monday morning at the Manhattan Supreme Court. Outside, reporters crowded around the entrance, cameras flashing, waiting to catch a glimpse of the man at the center of the city's biggest scandal. Inside courtroom 8B, the tension was thick. Every seat was filled. All eyes were on Michael Carter, a tech entrepreneur once hailed as a visionary, now accused of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Michael, 52 years old, sat quietly at the defendant's table. His tailored suit couldn't hide the fatigue on his face. Just 6 months ago, he was the respected CEO of Carter Solutions, a multi-million-dollar startup praised for innovation. Today, he was alone, betrayed by his board, abandoned by his wife, and about to be publicly humiliated. Then came the final blow. "I can no longer, in good conscience, represent Mr. Carter," said Benjamin Hart, one of New York's most expensive defense attorneys. He stood up, collected his briefcase, and walked out of the courtroom without another word. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Michael didn't even flinch. Judge Linda Ramirez, a sharp and composed woman in her early 60s, looked over her glasses. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Carter. Without legal representation, I will have to postpone the proceedings." Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. Just months ago, he'd been speaking at tech conferences and investor events. Now, even answering a basic question felt impossible. Then, from the back of the courtroom, a calm voice broke the silence. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Everyone turned. Standing in the back row was a young woman with soft features and dark brown hair tied back in a practical bun. She wore a simple navy blue cleaning uniform and held a worn manila folder tightly against her chest. "My name is Grace Thompson," she said. "I work for Mr. Carter, and I have information that could impact this case." Judge Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "This is a court of law, not a town hall meeting. Please sit down." But Grace took a step forward. "Your Honor, I've tried to share this information with the district attorney's office for weeks. No one would listen." The assistant DA, Robert Keene, stood up. "Your Honor, this is inappropriate. Ms. Thompson is not a licensed attorney." "That may be true," Grace replied, "but I have evidence that shows the documents used to accuse Mr. Carter were altered. I believe he's being framed." The judge stared at her in silence. "Approach the bench," she finally said. As Grace walked down the aisle, Michael reached out and gently grabbed her arm. "Grace, don't. You could lose your job, your visa." "They've already taken everything from you," she whispered back. "Someone has to tell the truth." At the bench, Judge Ramirez leaned in. "Ms. Thompson, what exactly are you claiming?" Grace opened the folder and showed a printed spreadsheet. "These are the original financial documents. They've been tampered with. I also have a recording of Carter Solutions' CFO admitting to falsifying them under pressure from a board member." The courtroom erupted in whispers. "A recording?" Keene shot up. "That could be illegal. Was it obtained with proper consent?" Grace nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. The conversation took place in Mr. Carter's home office in New Jersey, where only one-party consent is required. I was cataloging files, part of my job as his housekeeper and personal assistant." Judge Ramirez looked surprised. "You were organizing financial documents?" "I have a business degree from the University of Chicago," Grace explained. "I took the housekeeping job while waiting for my work authorization to be approved." The room fell silent. Even Michael looked at her differently now, as if truly seeing her for the first time. Grace had always been polite, quiet, efficient. He'd hired her through an agency. He never imagined she had a background in finance or that she'd been quietly watching everything fall apart. Judge Ramirez leaned back. "We will recess for 1 hour while I review this evidence." As the room emptied, reporters rushed out to file their updates. Grace walked back to the defense table, where Michael sat frozen in disbelief. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you risk everything for me? I'm just your boss." She sat beside him. "Because what they're doing to you is wrong. And because when my mother was dying last Christmas, you paid for her treatment without telling me. You arranged for me to fly back home when I didn't have legal clearance. You never used it against me. That kindness mattered." Michael blinked. "That was nothing." "It was everything," Grace said. "But I'm not here out of gratitude. I'm here because you're innocent, and someone needs to prove it." 1 hour later, courtroom 8B was even more crowded than before. The press had spread the story like wildfire, a housekeeper stepping in to defend her billionaire boss in open court. Reporters whispered to each other while cameras clicked from the gallery. On the defense side, Michael Carter sat still, hands folded, watching the door. Grace Thompson walked back into the room wearing the same uniform, but something about her was different. Her presence was steadier now, her shoulders straighter, her gaze unwavering. Judge Ramirez returned and took her seat. "After reviewing the materials submitted," she began, "I am ordering a temporary suspension of this trial while we investigate potential misconduct involving the evidence provided by the prosecution." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Assistant DA Robert Keene shifted in his chair. "Your Honor, we followed proper procedure. My office receives countless tips." "That's not what I asked, Mr. Keene," Ramirez interrupted. "Did your office receive this evidence and ignore it?" I would have to check with my staff." "Please do that, immediately." Keene said nothing more. Outside the courthouse, Michael and Grace exited quietly through a side door to avoid the press. On the steps, he turned to her. "You didn't have to do this." She looked up at him. "I know, but I couldn't let them destroy you based on lies." That night, news segments across the country replayed the footage. "Carter's maid exposes fraud," read one headline. Others labeled her the housekeeper hero. Grace was suddenly a media sensation, a face and voice people wanted to hear. But she ignored all the requests for interviews. She didn't want fame. She wanted justice. Meanwhile, investigators started digging. What they uncovered confirmed Grace's claims, and more. The spreadsheet she had presented didn't match the one submitted to court. Email logs showed irregular forwarding behavior, and the audio? Verified as authentic by 2 forensic experts. In the recording, CFO Leonard Foster clearly stated that he had altered the numbers to frame Michael, under direct pressure from board member Alan Prescott. When confronted, Foster admitted everything. He confessed to acting on Prescott's orders, fearing for his own job. His cooperation opened a much broader investigation into Carter Solutions Board, revealing an internal power grab and plans to push Michael out permanently. Back at home, Michael paced the living room of his Manhattan apartment. "How did you even know where to look?" he asked. Grace shrugged. "I didn't at first, but I noticed patterns, gaps in documents, emails sent at odd hours. I started copying files, just in case." He stared at her in disbelief. "You saved me." Grace smiled faintly. "Not yet." But not everything was victory. The backlash came fast. Blogs ran smear pieces implying Grace and Michael had a secret relationship. Photos of them entering court were shared with misleading captions. "From maid to mistress?" one gossip site questioned. Grace received anonymous messages telling her to keep quiet, to go back where she came from. One morning, she found her front door vandalized with the word "liar" in red spray paint. Michael wanted to call the police, but Grace insisted. "That's what they want, to scare me into silence." She didn't stop. Even as the attacks continued, she pushed forward. More documents were reviewed, more evidence surfaced, and one by one, board members began to step down. The pressure was too great. Investors started pulling out. The brand that once symbolized innovation was now surrounded by scandal. But this time, the truth was on its side. Grace remained focused. "I didn't do this to bring anyone down," she told Michael. "I did it because people like Prescott think they're above the rules. They're not." In the following weeks, Grace's story became part of something bigger. A conversation across the country about corporate ethics, whistleblowers, and the unseen workers who hold more power than anyone realizes. But for Michael, it was simpler. He had lost his company, his reputation, and nearly his freedom. Yet in the darkest moment, the person who stood up for him wasn't a friend, a lawyer, or a colleague. It was someone he barely knew, someone who had quietly watched the truth unravel from the shadows of his own home. Now, as the final court date approached, the stakes couldn't be higher. The new prosecutor assigned to the case hinted that the charges could be dropped entirely. But nothing was certain. It would all depend on what happened next. Michael looked out over the city from his apartment window. "It's not just about clearing my name anymore," he said. Grace nodded. "It's about making sure this never happens again." The morning of the final hearing began with cold rain falling over Manhattan. The courthouse steps were slick, and the city felt muted. Inside courtroom 8B, the mood was far from calm. Journalists filled the gallery. Spectators murmured. Everyone was waiting for what might be the final twist in the case that had shocked the country. Michael Carter arrived early, dressed in a dark navy suit. His posture was straight, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. He hadn't slept. The weight of uncertainty was heavier than ever. Grace Thompson entered shortly after, quietly, wearing a simple black coat and no makeup. She looked tired, too, not from fear, but from weeks of relentless fighting. When Judge Ramirez entered, silence fell. She reviewed the files in front of her before speaking. "Before we proceed," she said, "this court will hear new motions filed by the defense and the prosecution regarding the admissibility of certain evidence." Everyone knew what that meant. The prosecution was attempting to have Grace's recording thrown out. Assistant DA Robert Keene stood. "Your Honor, we argue that the recording presented by Ms. Thompson was obtained without proper legal process. Its use in this court undermines due procedure." Judge Ramirez turned to the defense. Michael's new legal counsel responded with clarity. "The recording was made legally in New Jersey, a one-party consent state. It has been verified and supported by additional material evidence, including emails and testimony." Still, tension rippled through the courtroom. Grace sat silently, watching, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. Michael glanced at her, but said nothing. Everyone was holding their breath. Then came the moment of doubt. The prosecution called for a recess to file an emergency motion. It was a delaying tactic, a last attempt to create chaos, confusion, hesitation. The judge granted 30 minutes. Outside, in the hallway, Michael leaned against the wall, eyes closed. "They're trying to drag this out until people stop paying attention." Grace stepped beside him. "Let them. We're still here. We're not backing down." He looked at her. "I don't think I've ever really thanked you." She smiled faintly. "You don't have to. This was never about gratitude. But it was about something, wasn't it?" Grace took a breath. It was about not letting fear win. The courtroom resumed. As Judge Ramirez re-entered, her face was unreadable. She called both sides to order. "After review, this court will allow the recording to remain part of the case." There was a sudden release of tension. Some gasped, others sighed. Michael closed his eyes. Grace exhaled deeply. But the pressure was far from over. That afternoon, the prosecution shocked everyone by calling Leonard Foster, the former CFO, to the stand. Foster, now cooperating, was clearly uneasy. His voice shook as he confirmed everything: the altered documents, the pressure from board member Alan Prescott, and the cover-up that followed. The courtroom was dead silent. Foster then described how Prescott planned to force Michael out and take control of a patent worth billions. They needed a fall guy, he said. Michael was the perfect target. Too busy, too trusting, too isolated. It was devastating testimony. Michael looked as if the air had been knocked out of him. Grace stared ahead, jaw tight. The truth, now spoken out loud, was more painful than either of them expected. Later that day, during a short break, Grace found herself alone in the courthouse restroom. She stared at her reflection. Her hands were shaking. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to collect herself. Suddenly, the stall door behind her opened. A note slipped under it. She picked it up. One line printed in bold letters, "Walk away or you'll regret it." Grace didn't flinch. She folded the note and threw it in the trash. That evening, after court adjourned, Michael walked her to her apartment building. "This is going to get uglier before it gets better," he said. "I know," she replied, "but we're too close to stop now." From a distance, someone watched them. A figure in a car with tinted windows, engine running, headlights off. Neither of them noticed. In the media, public opinion was shifting. What began as a scandal now looked like a cover-up. Editorials called Grace a whistleblower. Civil rights groups praised her. But threats increased too. Michael's email was flooded with anonymous warnings. Grace received phone calls with no voice on the other end. Every day felt like a risk, but every day they showed up. They were not just defending Michael anymore. They were exposing a system that nearly destroyed an innocent man, and would have, if not for someone the world had overlooked. And now, with the final verdict approaching, the tension had reached its peak. One way or another, it would all end soon. The final day arrived. Manhattan was unusually quiet for a Friday morning. At the courthouse, police presence had increased. The courtroom was packed once again. News cameras lined the hallways. Michael Carter sat at the defense table with steady hands, wearing a charcoal gray suit. His eyes were sharp. Grace Thompson sat nearby, silent and composed, the folder of evidence still clutched tightly. Judge Linda Ramirez entered with calm authority. "This court has considered all testimony, documents, and motions presented throughout this case," she began. "The integrity of our justice system depends not just on laws, but on those brave enough to defend them." She turned toward the courtroom gallery. "After careful review, I am dismissing all charges against Mr. Michael Carter. Furthermore, I am referring Alan Prescott and others involved for investigation related to evidence tampering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." The courtroom erupted. Some clapped, others gasped. Michael remained seated, head bowed. Grace looked over at him and smiled, a small, quiet smile of victory. The weight that had been crushing them for months seemed to lift in a single breath. Outside, a crowd waited. When Michael and Grace exited the courthouse, they were greeted by cheers, flashing cameras, and dozens of microphones. Reporters shouted questions, but Michael raised a hand. "I'll speak," he said. The crowd quieted. "I stand here free today because someone believed in the truth when no one else would. Grace Thompson didn't just save my reputation. She saved my life." He turned toward her. "She risked everything to do what was right, not for reward, not for fame, but because she refused to stay silent in the face of injustice." Grace didn't speak. She didn't need to. That night, Michael found her packing a small suitcase in her apartment. "You're leaving?" he asked. She nodded. "My residency is finally approved. I've accepted a research position in Boston, ethics and finance. Something quieter." He paused. "You deserve it. But before you go, I wanted to ask you something." She raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. A job offer?" He chuckled. "Not just a job. I want you to join Carter Solutions, not as an assistant, but as chief ethics officer." Grace blinked. "You want me on your executive team?" "I want someone I trust," Michael said. "Someone who knows what integrity really means. Someone who doesn't flinch when it matters." She looked down. "People will talk. Let them," he replied. "We know the truth." 3 months later, Carter Solutions released a new code of ethics, written by Grace. The company rebuilt its reputation, launched its delayed product, and even regained lost investors. But more than that, it became a symbol of corporate accountability. A feature article in the New York Times called "Grace, the Conscience Behind the Comeback." In her new office, modest but filled with light, Grace pinned the article beside a handwritten letter from her mother. It read, "Grace, I always told you, doing the right thing might not be easy, but it will take you places." She smiled. From her window, she could see Michael talking to employees on the courtyard lawn. He had changed, calmer, more thoughtful, more grounded. He had nearly lost everything, but gained something rare: clarity. And Grace? She had never planned to be a hero. She had only wanted to protect the truth. In doing so, she reminded the world that courage doesn't come from power. It comes from conviction. And sometimes, the most powerful voices belong to those no one thought were listening. So if you've ever felt small, invisible, or powerless, remember Grace. And if this story moved you, follow our channel for more true stories that prove one thing: the truth matters. Always.